Greek fire was a liquid flame that water couldn't put out. It defended an empire for centuries. The secret was so powerful, it vanished from history. The recipe is gone. We're going to look at the science of it and the strategy, how a burning sea could break a naval blockade, and why the complete formula died with the people who made it. There's a cost to a secret that can never be shared. For centuries, Roman power had been reduced to just one city, a magnificent city on a peninsula. Constantinople. It had these massive walls on the land side, but the seaward side was open, a vulnerability, and by the year 674, that vulnerability was being tested. A force had swept across the ancient world. A powerful Arab fleet arrived. They weren't there for a raid. They came to lay a permanent siege. They blockaded the great city by sea, cut off its lifelines, tightened a grip that could strangle an empire. This was the pressure cooker, history teetering on the edge, the survival of a civilization, its art, its law, its knowledge depended on breaking that naval blockade. The odds were overwhelming, and in that atmosphere of smoke and desperation, a figure steps from the shadows, Kallinikos, an architect from Heliopolis. A refugee fleeing the advancing forces, he carried a dangerous secret with him. The question that's echoed ever since is simple: was Kallinikos a lone genius, a brilliant chemist who discovered the formula in his workshop, or was he a messenger, someone who brought together older fragments of knowledge, recipes for incendiary weapons known to alchemists for generations, and synthesized them under the urgent demand of total war? We may never know the full truth of his contribution, but his legacy is tied to that moment. The true spark wasn't merely chemical, it was the crushing weight of necessity. An empire's back was against the wall. In that extreme pressure, innovation wasn't a luxury. It was the only path to dawn. The legend of the inventor meets the hard reality of a city fighting for its life that sets the stage for one of history's most consequential discoveries. And one of its most mysterious. Kallinikos brought his secret to the emperor. The substance was a liquid fire, a wet fire that stuck to whatever it touched. It wasn't thrown in pots, it was pressurized, shot from bronze tubes, siphons that could spray a burning stream across the water, and water couldn't put it out. It seemed to burn on the sea itself. So what created that effect? The full recipe was a state secret. Knowledge was compartmentalized. The chemists who mixed it knew only their part. The generals who used it didn't know how to make it. That fragmentation was its first defense. When the empire fell, the formula didn't just get lost. It was designed to be lost. All we have are fragments from historical accounts, centuries of detective work. The leading theory points to crude petroleum, what they called naphtha, from natural seeps around the Black Sea. That was the flammable fuel, but naphtha alone doesn't explain it. It doesn't cling like that. It can be put out with water, so the additives, some accounts suggest quicklime, a substance that heats up violently with water, that could create a chemical ignition, a reaction starting the fire without a flame, which would explain why it seemed to ignite on contact with the waves. Other ingredients likely included pine resin or sap to thicken it, make it sticky like a burning tar, and maybe sulfur or saltpeter to intensify the burn. Think of it as a medieval chemical cocktail. Each component played a role. The petroleum was the fuel, the resin was the glue, the quicklime was the starter. Combined in the right proportions under the right pressure, it became something new. Modern chemists and historians have tried to reverse engineer it for years. Some attempts produce impressive, terrifying flames, but none is the definitive formula. Every reconstruction is an educated guess, because the true secret wasn't just the ingredients list. It was the precise ratios, the mixing order, the preparation method. the engineering of the delivery system. A single mistake in the process could mean catastrophic failure. Or an explosion in the hands of the crew. This is why the mystery persists. You can have all the supposed ingredients on a table and still be centuries away from the real thing. The formula's power was protected by its own complexity, and that guarded secrecy reveals a deeper truth. It wasn't just a tool of war, it was a psychological instrument. A shadow whose very uncertainty became part of its strength. A deadly formula is just a prisoner in a flask. To be a weapon, it needed a delivery system. That's the second mystery. The chemistry was one half, the engineering was the other. The Byzantines solved it with a terrifying piece of naval technology. A specialized warship called the Dromon, a long, fast galley powered by rows of oarsmen, but at its prow, instead of a ram, was something else, a bronze tube mounted in a fixed position. Often shaped like a roaring lion or a dragon's head, that was the Siphon, an early flamethrower. Inside the ship, a team of specialists worked. They were the Siphonarioi. Chosen for strength and for nerve, their workspace was pressurized tanks, braziers of live coals, and the unstable liquid. The process was a risk. Using a large pump, likely a force pump, they'd pressurize the mixture in a sealed bronze tank. A brazier at the siphon's mouth provided the ignition. Then a valve opened. What emerged wasn't a thrown pot. It was a continuous, roaring jet of liquid fire. A screaming arc of orange and black smoke. It could travel over 50 feet across the water. The sound alone must have been apocalyptic. A deep roar from the dragon's head, then the hiss of the stream striking wood and sails and men. The psychological impact can't be overstated. For an enemy sailor, every element was turned against them. The sea, usually a refuge, became a field of flame. The water could ignite. Trying to douse the fire only fed it. This wasn't just an attack, it was a demonstration of power. It looked like magic or the wrath of God. The technology was as sophisticated as the chemistry. It needed precise metallurgy for tubes that wouldn't melt. It required an understanding of pressure and fluid dynamics to project the stream. And it needed the Dromon, a ship fast enough to get close, unleash its breath, and withdraw. This integration made Greek fire a system, not just a substance. The Siphonarioi were the keepers of that system. Their training was a state secret, passed down in guarded units. Losing a Dromon wasn't just losing a ship. It risked the enemy capturing the Siphon, so these vessels were protected at all costs. They were the Empire's ultimate trump card, deployed only in the most dire situations. Their presence on the horizon could break an enemy's will before a single flame was lit. The pressure on Constantinople was total. For 4 years, the Arab fleet held its blockade, a wall of ships that cut the city off from everything. Each season of the siege wore them down. Then the moment came. The Dromons, those fast galleys, came out of the harbors. The crews had trained for this. The Siphonarioi were at their bronze tubes, the fires hot. They closed in, and they unleashed the sea itself on the enemy. What happened next wasn't a normal battle. It was something elemental. Streams of liquid fire shot across the water, hitting ships and setting them ablaze instantly. This fire didn't splash away. It clung, it crawled, it turned hulls into great pyres, and the most terrifying part, where the mixture spilled on the waves, it kept burning. The water was no escape. It became a sheet of flame, trapping ships inside a ring of fire. The accounts describe the chaos. For the sailors, seeing a substance that defied fire and water, it must have been a primal dread. This wasn't a weapon they could understand. It felt supernatural. To the defenders on the walls watching the night burn orange, it must have seemed like a miracle. To the attackers, it was a nightmare made real. The psychological break was absolute. The Arab fleet, so confident for years, shattered. The siege ended. The empire, right on the edge of disappearing, could breathe again. This victory did more than save a city. It created a legend. In that one fiery engagement, Greek fire went from a secret project to a mythic force. They called it Hygron-per, the wet fire, or Thalassion-per, the sea fire, but its true name was spoken with awe. It was seen as the Perfuriton, the guarded fire, a gift from God to the Christian emperor. For the empire's enemies, it was a curse, a demonic trick. Its reputation for being unstoppable didn't come from stories. It came from the witnessed horror of a burning sea. The weapon had passed its test by fire, and in doing that, it gave the Byzantine Empire a shield of psychological terror that lasted centuries. Just the rumor of its presence could turn fleets away. It built a buffer of fear around the empire's heart, but that power had a deep, hidden weakness. To hold onto a legend, you can never let anyone see how it's made. That psychological barrier was the weapon's real achievement. The burn itself was temporary, but the fear it planted in enemy minds lasted for generations. Think about a sailor or a commander in that medieval world. Your whole understanding of warfare, of physics, is built on certain rules. Wood burns. Water puts out fire. That's the foundation of naval combat. Then you face an opponent whose fire laughs at those rules. It clings to your ship. It burns on the water itself. It roars from the mouths of metal beasts. What do you call that? You don't call it chemistry. You call it sorcery or divine wrath. The Byzantines understood this. They didn't just have a secret weapon. They cultivated a legend. Emperors would demonstrate it for foreign ambassadors. A controlled show of force designed to send a message back to rival courts. The message was clear: challenge us, and you challenge not just our armies, but a power you cannot comprehend. This was strategic myth-making. By wrapping the weapon in ceremony and secrecy, they turned a technological advantage into a supernatural one. The very uncertainty of what it was made it more terrifying. Was it a liquid, a powder, a spell? That mystery was its shield. An enemy fleet, hearing rumors of the sea fire, would have to weigh the risk. Do we sail into waters where the elements themselves might turn against us? Often, the answer was no. The cost of finding out was too high. So for centuries, the mere threat of Greek fire did the work of an entire navy. It created a buffer of dread around the empire's heartland, a psychological moat as effective as Constantinople's famous land walls. Its true formula was locked away, but its reputation traveled freely. It grew with every retelling. It became less a weapon and more a story, and sometimes the story is enough to hold the line. That legend depended on something impossible. It burned on water, and that wasn't just a metaphor. It was the defining trait, the detail that took a weapon and turned it into a kind of primal fear. For a sailor, the sea is your escape from fire. To see that escape become fuel, to watch flames moving across the waves, it breaks a basic rule of the world. So the question is how? The answer is in density and in persistence. The fuel was almost certainly a light crude oil, what the old texts call naphtha. And that's an important distinction. Oils aren't all the same. Heavy oils can sink or blend in, but light naphtha is less dense than water. Pour it on the sea and it doesn't sink. It spreads out, a thin, volatile film right on the surface. Then you light it. You don't get fire in the water. You get fire on the water, feeding from that floating layer. That alone gives you the illusion of a burning sea. But the Byzantines needed more than a flash. They needed a burn that lasted, that clung. That's where the additives came in. To the naphtha, they probably mixed thick, sticky things, pine resin or liquid asphalt. Think of it as a kind of dangerous syrup. The resin acted as an emulsifier, a thickener. It did two things. First, it made the mixture viscous, so it wouldn't just splash off on impact. It would stick to a ship's wooden hull like a burning glue. Incredibly hard to scrape off. Second, it made the fuel persist. A pure, thin film of naphtha might evaporate or burn off fast, but thickened with resin, the burning mixture would pool. It would cling together, creating lasting patches of fire that floated and drifted with the currents that made a horrifying tactical space. A ship might dodge the initial jet from the Siphon, only to sail into a burning slick left behind. The sea itself became a hazard zone. You can contrast this with other incendiaries, simple pitch or oil pots. Those could start fires on decks, but they didn't change the nature of the battlefield. They didn't make the water an enemy. Greek fire did. That transformation is what locked in its reputation. It wasn't just an attack on ships, it was an attack on the logic of naval warfare. By mastering that simple principle of floating, persistent fuel, the Byzantine chemists didn't just create a new weapon, they altered the perceived laws of nature for anyone who faced it. And in that altered reality, their empire found a shield, not made of steel but of flame and of ore. A legend is fragile. It breaks with one leak, one captured craftsman. So the empire built a fortress around the secret, not of stone but of silence, guarded by a security apparatus a modern agency would recognize. At the top of that pyramid sat one person, the emperor. The ultimate custodian. The formula was a dynastic treasure, a pillar of the state as vital as the crown, passed down likely only from emperor to chosen heir and only when necessary. This wasn't just protecting a recipe, it was ensuring the ultimate power of the empire stayed exclusively in the hands of the one person who embodied it. The emperor didn't mix the chemicals, of course. That dangerous work happened in a dedicated, secure workshop. Historical sources suggest it was inside the palace precincts in Constantinople, behind layers of guards and walls. Inside worked a small, sworn brotherhood of artisans, siphon makers and chemists, bound by solemn oaths carrying the weight of empire and faith. Their lives were dedicated to this one task. Well compensated, housed within the palace, watched constantly, loyalty ensured through total dependence and severe consequence. The security genius was compartmentalization. No single artisan knew the complete process. One group specialized in distilling the naphtha, another mastered the resins and additives, a third unit worked on the metallurgy, the assembly of the bronze siphons and pumps. The final mixing into the finished, terrifying liquid was likely the task of only one or two master craftsmen, under direct supervision of a trusted imperial official. So if an artisan defected or a workshop was captured, they could only reveal a fragment. They knew their part but not the whole. A defector could tell an enemy about pine resin, but not the precise source or treatment. Describe a bronze tube but not the alloy or the pressure tolerances. The complete formula existed in its entirety in only a few places, the mind of the emperor. The sealed imperial archives and the fragmented, practiced routines of the isolated workshop teams. This made the secret self-destructing, designed to vanish if the structure that held it ever collapsed. The policy was brutal in its logic. The weapon was so valuable that the individuals who created it had to be made into living locks. Their knowledge was a national asset they could never truly own. They served the flame, and in doing so, they became another layer of its defense. Human components in a machine built to inspire awe and ensure that awe could never be replicated. The most dangerous moment was right before the fire left the ship. A pressurized stream of flammable liquid. If you can't light it, it's useless, or worse, it's catastrophic. The engineering challenge was immense. You have a crew on a wooden galley rocking on the waves facing an enemy. They need to open a valve and have a jet of fire shoot out. Instantly, reliably, any failure, any delay, a spark in the wrong place, and the entire ship becomes the first casualty. So the ignition puzzle. The leading theory is a system of elegant simplicity. At the mouth of the bronze siphon, often shaped like a dragon or lion's head, there was likely a small, perpetually burning brazier, a shielded wick soaked in something like pitch. A constant, ready source of ignition. When the pressurized liquid was forced through the tube, it passed directly through this flame. The result was immediate. A stream became a screaming torrent of fire the moment it met the air. Like a colossal maritime blowtorch, the operator controlled the fire by controlling the liquid's flow. Not by fiddling with a separate switch. That design minimized the steps in the heat of battle, but there's another possibility, hinted at in some accounts. It involves a chemical trick. If the mixture contained quicklime, and many historians suspect it did, then it had a hidden property. Quicklime reacts violently with water. It generates intense heat, so imagine a jet of this concoction hitting the spray of the sea, or a wave splashing against an enemy hull. The contact with water could trigger a secondary chemical ignition. That would create the terrifying illusion, the sea itself catching fire spontaneously. It wasn't magic, it was a pre-programmed chemical reaction, turning the enemy's environment into part of the weapon. Whether it was the constant brazier, the chemical reaction, or both, the system had to be fail-safe. The operators weren't just operators, they were technicians performing a high-stakes ritual. Their lives depended on the precision of their equipment, the exactness of their procedure. One leak in the pressurized tank, one misplaced ember, and the guardian of the empire became its own funeral pyre. That constant, intimate danger reveals the weapon's true nature. It was a double-edged sword in the most literal sense, a power so great that wielding it required walking a razor's edge. Between salvation and self-annihilation, every time they unleashed the fire, they were betting their lives that their engineering was perfect, and for centuries that bet held. The flame roared out, not in, a testament to a mastery that was as much about control as it was about chaos. But the burning sea was only the start. The Byzantine military saw something more. If this could control the water, why not the land? The same idea that made it a terror for ships could be a fortress's best ally. The manuals, the chronicles, they suggest a wider arsenal. They mention smaller versions of the big ship siphons, the cherasiphons, hand siphons. Picture a soldier with a metal tube on his back, linked to a pressurized container. A weapon that could shoot a short, fierce jet of flame. An ancient flamethrower team used from city walls during a siege or by infantry on a field. It changed the math of an attack. A wooden siege tower built over weeks could become a towering fire in moments. Scaling ladders full of climbers turned into chimneys of death. The psychological effect here was more personal. At sea, the fire was a distant force. On the walls, it was intimate. A defender could look an attacker in the eye and unleash something that seemed to defy nature. This shift is crucial. Greek fire moved from a naval secret weapon to a part of Byzantine military doctrine, a tool for multiple domains. The same substance, delivered through different systems, defended the empire on every front. The strategic value grew. An enemy now had to think not just about the dreaded ships at sea, but also the handheld breath of the dragon at a land fort in a mountain pass. This wasn't one secret weapon. It was a family of weapons all built around one guarded core technology. The surviving manuals, like Emperor Leo VI's writings, talk about its use in different situations. They treat it not as a miracle but as standard, elite equipment. Its deployment was calculated, its conservation was important. That normalization in their own texts is telling. For their enemies, it was a supernatural horror. For the Byzantine strategist, it was another tool in the kit, the most devastating one. That duality is key. The legend that terrified their foes was built on a cold, practical understanding of chemistry, engineering, and tactics. The empire didn't just have a magic formula. They had a system for using it wherever a threat appeared. And that system was most critical defending the empire's heart, the city where it was born. The walls of Constantinople themselves became a platform for the fire. a final, fiery argument against anyone who thought the city could be taken by force. This weapon of science was also a tool of sacred theater. That roaring flame became a powerful symbol. It was woven into the identity of the empire. Byzantine emperors were masters of image. And Greek fire was a perfect prop for that political drama. Its use was never presented as mere chemistry. In the official histories, in court poetry, in speeches, it was framed as a celestial gift. A literal fire from heaven bestowed upon the Christian emperor to defend God's chosen empire on earth. This wasn't just public relations, it was a core part of imperial ideology. The emperor was seen as God's representative, his vicegerent, and what better proof of that divine mandate than a weapon that defied nature itself? When the Siphons roared, it wasn't just a military unit attacking. It was the manifested wrath of the divine channeled through the sovereign. The enemy wasn't just fighting men, they were battling a holy force. This symbolism was reinforced everywhere. You can imagine the scene for a foreign ambassador invited to the palace. After discussions in the grand halls, they might be led to the sea walls for a demonstration. Not in battle, but in a controlled, terrifying display. The night would light up with that unmistakable roar. The message was unambiguous. You are not dealing with a normal kingdom. You are dealing with a power protected by heaven. The psychological impact was profound. An ambassador would return home not with a report of a new weapon, but with a story of a miracle. That story would ripple through foreign courts, amplifying the legend far more than any battlefield rumor could. At home, for the citizens of Constantinople, the fire served a different purpose. It was a guarantee. In a world of constant threats, the sight of that flame on the water, or even the knowledge of its existence, reinforced their belief in a special destiny. It told them their city, their faith, their emperor were under direct protection. This turned a military asset into a pillar of social stability. Art and literature from the period used fire as a metaphor. For divine cleansing and imperial power, the controlled, directed flame of the siphon was the perfect symbol. It was not wild, chaotic fire, it was ordered fire. Purposeful fire, just as the emperor was to bring God's order to a chaotic world. The weapon's very secrecy fed this sacred narrative. Because the formula was a state secret, guarded by the emperor alone, it became a mystical inheritance. A holy trust. This deepened the connection between the ruler's authority and the weapon's power. They were inseparable. To challenge the emperor was to challenge the source of the fire itself. This ideological framework gave the Byzantines immense soft power. It meant that even in periods of military weakness, the lingering myth of the sea fire could give enemies pause. The flame was more than a physical defense. It was a story they told about themselves, and they made the whole world believe it. And like any powerful story, its ending would become the greatest mystery of all. The empire kept very careful records about their divine fire, but there was always one page that stayed blank. Byzantine emperors, they weren't just generals. They were scholars. They wrote down their strategies. The most famous of these guides is the Tactica by Emperor Leo VI, Leo the Wise, and in it you get these very specific practical orders for using the sea fire. He talks about the special ships, the dromons. He says you need the wind at your back so the fire goes toward the enemy fleet and not your own. He emphasizes surprise, a sudden and total attack to create the most terror. The manual describes the siphon operators, how they're trained, where they stand on the deck. It reads like a modern guide for a complex weapon. Every detail of its use is there. Except the recipe, that one thing is missing, and that absence says everything. It's the silence right in the middle of the book, an empty space protected by imperial law. The message to a Byzantine officer was straightforward. Here is how you use the empire's greatest weapon, but you will never know how it's made. This split in knowledge was a deliberate security measure. The general knew the tactics, not the chemistry. The chemist knew the mixture, but not the overall plan. in theory, only the emperor saw the whole picture. That divide between knowing exactly how to use it and knowing nothing about how to create it, that's the main clue. It means they didn't treat this as just another tool. It was a controlled asset of the highest priority. Other manuals, like the later one called the Silog Tacticorum, they give a few more details. They talk about versions of the weapon, like the handheld Siphons for fights on land. They even mention different mixtures for different jobs, some for burning ships, others maybe for fires in a siege that needed to last. They stress constant practice, drills in calm conditions so the crews are perfect when a storm hits. But again, the formula itself is forbidden. Reading these texts is frustrating historically. You're handed the operator's manual for a legendary device. But all the schematics, all the blueprints for the engine, they've been cut out systematically, and that tells you something deep about Byzantine society. Their secrecy wasn't a historical accident. It was a disciplined system, a bureaucratic one, and it was brilliantly effective. They wrote down everything except the one thing that could undo their advantage. The military manuals are like a map, but the spot where the treasure is buried has been cut away with scissors. They lead you right to the edge of the secret. And then the trail just ends, leaving centuries of questions and the echo of a flame that once ruled the sea. The terror of that flame wasn't just a Byzantine story. It shows up in the chronicles of their greatest rivals. Arab historians writing from the other side of the siege, they called it al-naft. They describe a substance you couldn't fight. You could only fear it. One writer talks about a fire that flowed like water, that it would chase a ship across the waves. Another describes men jumping into the sea to escape the burning decks, and finding the water itself on fire around them. This wasn't propaganda. This was recorded trauma. Their respect came from that fear. They saw it as a singular advantage, a technological marvel they had to overcome or possess. The immediate military response was pragmatic. Arab naval commanders learned through brutal experience to avoid close engagements with the Dromans. They adapted faster ships, hit-and-run raids, trying to attack from beyond the Siphon's range, but the ultimate goal was capture, to seize a Siphon-equipped ship intact, or to take a Siphonarios alive. That became a high-priority mission. The intelligence value was incalculable. There are hints in the records, attempts to bribe officials, to send spies into the workshops of Constantinople. The risks were extreme. The Byzantines guarded their secret with a lethality that matched the fire. A captured operator would face execution before he could talk. A captured Siphon might be rigged to fail, or the ship scuttled before it could be studied. This shadow war of espionage raged for centuries, a silent battle behind the naval clashes. When capture failed, they turned to replication. Arab chemists and military engineers weren't primitive. They had their own traditions with incendiaries, using naphtha in siege warfare. Facing Greek fire, they started their own research, trying to reverse engineer the effect. Accounts mention experiments with different mixtures, with pressurized delivery systems of their own. They likely achieved powerful burning agents, Greek fire-adjacent weapons. But the consensus from both Arab and later historians is they never cracked the exact formula. They could create a fearsome fire, but not the fire. Not the one that burned on water with that persistence, projected with that force. This technological arms race had a side effect. It pushed military science forward across the Mediterranean. The challenge of Greek fire stimulated innovation in naval design, in chemistry, in siegecraft. It forced empires to think differently about warfare. In trying to counter a legend, they advanced the state of the art. The weapon was a catalyst. Its greatest legacy might not have been the ships it burned, but the minds it forced to invent. The formula was kept secret, locked away, but the ingredients came from everywhere. Naphtha, the base of the fire, it wasn't made in a workshop. It came from the ground, natural oil seeps, tar pits. They were found across the empire, maybe from Crimea near Chersonesos or from the Caspian Sea region. Possibly from what's now Iraq. This was raw material, thick, smelly, dangerous, collected from pools or shallow wells. Getting it to Constantinople was a huge task. They'd ship it in sealed clay jars or in barrels, on merchant ships that had to stay away from any flame. That journey across the Black Sea, it was the first dangerous step. Then the thickeners. To make it stick, they needed resin from the pine forests in Greece and Anatolia. Tappers would collect the sap, this sticky stuff that hardens. It was a common trade good, used for sealing ships for torches, but the best batches went to the imperial workshops. They'd melt it down, purify it, blend it into the naphtha. That was a delicate process, too much resin and it wouldn't flow through the tubes, too little and it would just splash off. The balance was critical. Other additives came from the empire's mines. Sulfur, which makes a choking smoke, likely from volcanic areas like the Aegean Islands. Saltpeter, which makes fire burn hotter, probably gathered from certain soils or caves. And quicklime, if that theory is right, that required quarrying limestone and baking it in hot kilns. Each ingredient needed its own knowledge, where to find it, how to process it to the right purity. So the power of Greek fire, it wasn't just chemical, it was logistical, it was economic. The Byzantine Empire was a machine for gathering things. Its trade routes from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean gave it access. Its bureaucracy organized the shipments. Its treasury paid for everything. The workshops in Constantinople were just the end point of a huge network, a supply chain over mountains, through forests, across seas. If any link broke, if a source was captured, if a ship sank, if miners stopped, production could stop. The legend of the burning sea depended on mining quotas, on shipping schedules, on taxes for resin. We imagine an alchemist in a secret room. The reality was an empire-wide effort. Hundreds of people, tree tappers, barrel makers, ship captains, they were part of the secret. They might not have known the final use, but their labor fueled the flame. The weapon lasted because of organized production. It was a system, and like any system, it had a weak point. The trade network that kept the fire supplied it would face its final test from the north. The Viking Rus, they sailed their longships down the rivers into the Black Sea. Constantinople was the ultimate prize, a city of staggering wealth, its golden domes a beacon. In the spring of 941, a massive Rus fleet appeared, said to be hundreds of ships. Their leader, Prince Igor, he saw walls, a waterline seemingly undefended. The main Byzantine fleet was away, fighting somewhere else. It was a moment of supreme opportunity. The Rus warriors began their assault, confident in their mastery of the coastal raid. They couldn't have known they were sailing into a trap set around a single, guarded secret. The defenders hadn't been idle. The main fleet was gone, but the emperors had a plan for this. A few of the older, heavier dromons, the ones with the siphons, they'd been held back, hidden in the Golden Horn harbor behind the Great Chain. As the Rus ships closed in, these vessels were unleashed. The account from the time is vivid. The Rus, seeing only a handful of ships approach, probably felt contempt. Then the bronze tubes swung toward them. That familiar, apocalyptic roar shattered the air. Streams of liquid flame arched out, striking the lead longships. For the Norsemen, this was a new kind of warfare. Their ships were masterpieces of wood and tar, built for speed and boarding. They were perfect fuel. The fire didn't just burn, it flowed across the decks, trapping crews in an inescapable inferno. Panic spread faster than the flames. The Rus tried to row away to reach the shore, but the Byzantine ships harried them, spouting fire. Many warriors, they saw the sea itself begin to burn around their sinking ships. They chose to leap into the water where the thickened fuel clung to them. The chronicler Liutprand of Cremona wrote about the survivors. They described a terrible, living fire that seemed to chase them through the waves. The psychological impact on the Viking mind, it can't be overstated. This was a culture that revered personal bravery, that faced steel and storm without flinching. But this was different. This force made courage irrelevant. You couldn't block it with a shield. You couldn't outfight it with an axe. The very element that was their road to riches, the sea, had been turned against them. By a technology they couldn't comprehend, the survivors carried that story back up the rivers, to Kiev and beyond, into the sagas of the north. The legend of the Grickjar, the Greeks, and their unquenchable fire became permanent. It framed Constantinople not just as a wealthy target, but as a place protected by a power bordering on the supernatural. This exchange, forged in fire, had a second act. The Rus, pragmatic above all, they soon shifted from raiding to trading. Within decades, treaties were signed. Viking warriors began serving as the emperor's personal guard, the famed Varangians. The very men who had fled the sea fire now swore oaths to protect the emperor who commanded it. In that, you see the ultimate strategic success of the weapon. It didn't just destroy enemies, it compelled respect. It reordered relationships. It turned the most fearsome raiders of the age into paid allies. The memory of the burning water made sure the treaties held. The weapon's legacy, then, wasn't just destruction. It was transformation. It wrote a lesson in fire and diplomacy on the waters of the Black Sea, a lesson that echoed from the marble halls of Constantinople to the wooden longhouses of Scandinavia. Of all the ingredients people have suggested, there's one that stands out: quicklime. It's a white powder. You make it by baking limestone in a fire. It looks like chalk. But it has this hidden, volatile property. When quicklime meets water, it doesn't just get wet, it reacts violently. That process is called slaking. It releases an intense burst of heat, enough heat, in theory, to ignite oil or other flammable materials. That one chemical fact could solve two of Greek fire's biggest mysteries: how it ignited on contact with the sea, and why water seemed to feed the flames instead of putting them out. The theory is compelling. Picture the mixture in the Siphon's tank. A slurry of naphtha thickened with pine resin, and within it a fine powder of quicklime suspended. This concoction is stable as long as it stays dry. But the moment it's projected onto a target or hits the spray of the waves, the water triggers the quicklime, a flash of chemical heat, hundreds of degrees, instantly igniting the flammable fuel. It wouldn't need a pilot light from a brazier. The enemy's own environment, the sea spray, becomes the match that explains the reports. A stream of liquid that seemed to catch fire the instant it touched the water, or a ship's hull. For a sailor throwing a bucket of seawater to fight the blaze, they'd only be delivering more ignition. More heat, making the fire worse. It fits the legend of a fire that water could not put out. It wasn't magic. It was a pre-programmed chemical trap. But for all its elegance, the quicklime theory has serious practical hurdles. The first is stability. How do you store and, more critically, pump a mixture containing a substance that reacts explosively with water? Any moisture in the air, any small leak, could cause a catastrophic reaction inside the siphon. Or the storage tank. The Byzantine chemists would have needed a way to keep the quicklime perfectly isolated until the very moment of firing. Maybe they coated the quicklime grains in a thin layer of wax or oil. Or maybe they kept it as a separate component, mixing it with the naphtha slurry at the last possible second, just before pressurization. That would add immense complexity and risk to an already dangerous procedure in the heat of battle. The second challenge is consistency. Quicklime's reaction is fast and fierce, but it might not provide a sustained, roaring jet of flame. It could cause a flash ignition, but would it create the continuous, flowing river of fire described in the chronicles? Perhaps it was used in combination with a traditional ignition source. The brazier at the siphon's mouth provided the main, reliable flame. The quicklime in the mixture then ensured that any spillage on the water would ignite spontaneously, creating the horrifying effect of a burning sea. This hybrid approach makes strategic sense. It guarantees the primary weapon works, while adding a layer of psychological terror through secondary, seemingly spontaneous combustion. Modern experimental archaeologists have tried to test this, mixing crude oil with quicklime. The results are dramatic. You can create a fire that flares up on contact with water. But replicating the controlled, projected stream of the Byzantine siphons, that remains elusive. The quicklime theory, like all the others, is a brilliant piece of historical detective work. It takes a detail from the ancient texts, the mention of a fire that ignites on water, and offers a plausible scientific mechanism. It shows how modern chemistry can illuminate the past. Yet it also highlights the gap between a plausible ingredient and a battlefield weapon. Knowing that quicklime could work is one thing. Engineering a stable, pumpable, battlefield-ready fluid that incorporates it is an entirely different level of mastery. That's the enduring puzzle. Each theory, including quicklime, gives us a piece, but the complete picture, the exact alchemy that made the sea itself burn, that final secret died with the last siphonarios who knew the order of operations. The quicklime isn't just a potential chemical component, it's a symbol of the ingenious, dangerous bridge between ancient knowledge and the desperate need to defend a civilization. A bridge built on a powder that holds fire within itself, waiting only for a drop of water to set it free. A monopoly on terror can't last forever. By the 11th and 12th centuries, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow. Power struggles inside, financial strain, losing territory, it all chipped away at the foundations. And as that happened, the sea fire's dominance began to erode. Slowly, almost invisibly, the first crack came from within. Those secret workshops, that perfect machine of compartmentalized knowledge, they needed imperial stability. A strong, centralized authority to fund them, protect them, enforce the silence. But during civil wars, palace coups, that stability vanished. Emperors overthrown, factions fighting in the streets, the treasury emptied. In that chaos, what happened to the master chemists? Were they killed? Did they flee, taking pieces of the secret with them? Or did the workshops just fall apart, budgets cut, supplies gone? The record doesn't say exactly, but the logic is clear. A secret that needs an empire to maintain it can't survive the empire coming apart. At the same time, new rivals appeared on the waves. Not the old empires, the Italian city-states, Venice, Genoa, Pisa, commercial giants, their wealth built on trade and maritime innovation. They fought the Byzantines for trade routes, for ports. And they brought a different kind of warfare, faster galleys, maneuverable, highly trained crossbowmen who could pick off Siphon crews from a distance. They avoided the head-on, close fights where Greek fire was most devastating. They fought a war of maneuver, of attrition. They didn't try to copy the fire. They tried to make it irrelevant, and they adapted. Fear eventually gives way to pragmatics. Sailors and commanders, after generations facing the legend, they started developing countermeasures. Accounts mention ships covered in wet hides, felt soaked in vinegar. The idea was a slick, non-porous, damp surface. When the sticky liquid hit, it might slide off before it could take hold. Vinegar, being acidic, might break down the adhesive properties of the resin. It wasn't perfect. A direct hit from the stream was still catastrophic. But it offered a chance. It reduced the weapon's psychological hold, turned a supernatural terror into a manageable hazard, still deadly but manageable. The existence of those counter-strategies is telling. It means the secret was no longer absolute. The aura of invincibility was fading. The weapon that defined Byzantine naval power for centuries was being neutralized. Slowly, not by one brilliant discovery, by a combination, the empire fading, losing its capacity to maintain the edge, the rise of nimble, adaptive rivals who refused to fight on its terms. And human ingenuity, when faced with an unstoppable force, it seeks a way around it, not to copy it. The sea fire was becoming a relic, a powerful one, but a relic. Its greatest defense had always been the belief it could not be countered. Once that belief was broken, the flame, however fierce, was just fire. The silence after the formula's end is as deep as the roar that started it. How does a state secret that big, protected by a whole empire, just vanish? It didn't fade like a forgotten song. Its disappearance was an event tied to the empire's own violent end. A few stark theories compete. Each one paints a different final chapter for that guarded fire. The most dramatic points to a single, catastrophic break. The year 1204, the Fourth Crusade. An army sworn to reclaim Jerusalem instead turned on the Christian capital, Constantinople. The city was brutally sacked. Fires burned for days, palaces and libraries were looted and burned. In that chaos, the secure workshops near the imperial docks wouldn't have been spared. They were targets of immense value. If the Crusaders found them, they would have looked for the secret, but understanding it, that's another matter. The likely outcome is grim. The specialized artisans, the Siphonarioi, would have been killed in the fighting, or they fled into a shattered city. Their carefully compartmentalized knowledge died with them, or it scattered to the winds. The physical things, the siphons, the recipes, the manuals might have been melted down for bronze, burned as fuel, carted away as curiosities no one understood. In this version, the secret wasn't stolen, it was murdered, collateral damage in the destruction of the civilization that made it. A second, quieter theory suggests a slow decay. Even before the Crusade, the empire was shrinking, impoverished. Maintaining the complex logistics for Greek fire was astronomically expensive. As naval budgets were cut, did the training of new Siphon crews lapse? Did the specialized workshops, lacking funds for materials and salaries, just stop production? The recipe, passed orally from master to apprentice for generations, might have suffered a death by 1,000 cuts. One master dies before teaching a crucial step. A source of pure naphtha is lost to enemy territory. A key additive becomes unavailable. Over decades, the formula degrades. What remains is a hollowed-out version, a pale imitation that doesn't work like it once did. The weapon fades from use not with a bang, but a whimper. Forgotten not through violence, but through neglect, through institutional decay. Then there's the possibility of a deliberate transaction. Could the Byzantines, in a moment of desperation, have traded their greatest secret for survival? In their final centuries, they made many alliances, often with Italian maritime powers like Venice or Genoa. The knowledge would have been an unimaginably valuable bargaining chip. Yet there's no credible historical record of that transfer. No sudden appearance of a Byzantine-like fire in another navy's arsenal. If it was sold or given, the recipient either failed to replicate it or chose to guard it just as closely, letting it die with their own dynasty. This theory feels like a shadow without a shape, plausible but with no evidence to give it form. The truth probably lies in a terrible combination. The slow decay of the institution made the system fragile. The cataclysm of 1204 then delivered the final, shattering blow. What remained wasn't a secret to be stolen, but a broken process no one alive could put back together. The last emperor who knew the formula's location died in the siege. The last master chemist fell in the streets. The last siphon operator never passed on his timing for the pump. The complete knowledge, which existed only in the connection between these isolated parts, was severed for good. Its disappearance marks the precise moment Greek fire completed its journey. It stopped being a weapon of war and became purely a legend, a memory of a burning sea, now untethered from any recipe that could ever bring it back. Anna Komnene wrote about it later in the 12th century. She was a Byzantine princess, a scholar. She called it the hygron per, the wet fire. She described the bronze siphons on the ships. For her, it was a matter of state, a technological advantage. It wasn't magic, it was engineering, but the Western chroniclers saw it differently, the knights and clerics who came east. They arrived in Constantinople and they were overwhelmed by the place, the wealth, the complexity, and then they saw this fire, or they heard the reports of it. It was almost outside their understanding. William of Tyre wrote about it. He said it was made from ingredients from a written formula. He said it was shot through tubes. And he noted that water made it worse, so you see a mind trying to work it out. He accepts it as a recipe. It's not purely supernatural, but the effect is still beyond anything he knows. Fulcher of Chartres was there with the First Crusade. He called it a grease fire. He said you couldn't put it out with water, you needed vinegar or sand. So now they're noting the countermeasures. The terror is being analyzed, demystified. For these men, the fire became a symbol. It showed Byzantine sophistication, yes. A science beyond their own, but it also fed another idea. To the Crusaders, the Byzantines were often seen as tricky, unreliable allies, a weapon that seemed to cheat nature, that felt unsettling. Deceitful even. Why fight with honor when you could use a chemical horror from a distance? It widened the rift. The fire was a physical sign of the gap between them. It was admired and feared, a power they couldn't replicate and didn't trust. These accounts are snapshots. They show the fire not in its 7th century peak, but in its later years. The tone has changed. The godlike terror the Arabs wrote about is now mixed with analysis, grudging adaptation. They know the countermeasures, the aura is fading. The legend is still there, but the mystery is being broken down into solvable problems. Find vinegar, use sand, stay out of range. In these Western words, you hear the echo of the flame. But you also hear the beginning of its silence. The legend of the burning sea didn't end with the empire. It just took a different form. When the last Siphon went quiet, the secret got out. It left its imperial cage and entered a new world, the world of alchemy. For the alchemist, Greek fire was the ultimate model, a physical proof that matter could be transformed into something terrifying through hidden knowledge. They weren't trying to defend a city, they were trying to unlock the universe, and in their manuscripts the name comes back. Recipes for Greek fire, or for something called wildfire, start to appear in their coded text. These weren't the true Byzantine formula. They were new concoctions, often dangerous ones: sulfur, saltpeter, naphtha, other substances. They were chasing the ghost of the idea. The power of a controlled, violent reaction. This pursuit was more than military curiosity. It was at the heart of the alchemical quest. Their great work was about transformation. Turning lead into gold, and here was a substance that turned peaceful liquids into fury. It represented a parallel mastery, mastery over fire and water. To possess that secret was to touch a divine power or a demonic one, so they experimented, they mixed, they distilled. Their laboratories with alembics and furnaces became the new workshops. Decentralized places where the legacy of the sea fire was tested and altered. This bridge is crucial. The failed attempts to recreate Greek fire contributed to the birth of early chemistry. That rigorous, secretive experimentation with flammable oils, salts, minerals, it advanced practical knowledge. It taught them about purification, about ratios, about stability. Out of that messy, dangerous work came gradual progress. The most significant result of that centuries-long quest was probably gunpowder. The black powder that redefined warfare in the West. It came from the same intellectual space. Alchemists looking for elixirs, for incendiary wonders, they stumbled on the explosive potential of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. The lineage is indirect, but you can see it. The desire to weaponize chemistry, so perfectly shown by the Byzantine flame, it drove experimentation. And that eventually yielded a different, world-changing formula. So the legacy of Greek fire isn't a dead end. It's a diverted river. when the Byzantine state died, its greatest technological secret flowed into underground streams. Into esoteric knowledge, it became a grail for thinkers who saw in it the promise of total chemical control. Their versions were different, more unstable. But the inspiration was clear. In trying to resurrect a lost weapon, these proto-chemists helped lay the groundwork for the next revolution in warfare. And in doing that, they ensured the idea of the burning sea would smolder in the imagination, long after the last ember cooled on the waters of the Golden Horn. The quest for the fire became a catalyst, sparking discoveries its original creators could never have seen. The trail gets fainter in the later centuries. The chronicles are less certain, the mentions are more ambiguous. We're looking for the last true flicker, the last time that authentic, terrifying roar echoed across the water to defend the empire. The search takes us to the empire's long autumn, to the 12th century. The bond between Constantinople and Venice had soured. It turned into open war. In the year 1171, a massive Venetian fleet attacked the Byzantine island of Chios. The empire retaliated. The historian Nyctas Choniates records the battle. He writes of Byzantine ships using a fearsome liquid fire against the Venetians. It's a credible, late account. It suggests the system was still operational. The weapon could still be deployed. It still had a shocking effect, but the context had changed. This wasn't a defense against an existential siege. It was a clash between former allies. A fight over trade and influence. The fire was a tool in a political struggle now, not a miracle saving civilization. After that, the record becomes a murky twilight. There are scattered mentions in the 13th and 14th centuries, less reliable ones. This was during the brutal civil wars. Factions tore the empire apart. Different groups controlled Constantinople. Did any of them still command the workshops? Could they still produce the true mixture? It's possible, but the evidence thins to a whisper. The knowledge was so compartmentalized, it was tied to the intact imperial bureaucracy. The chaos of those decades likely shattered it for good. What might have remained was a degraded memory. A recipe missing crucial steps, a siphon no one knew how to operate safely. The weapon would have become unreliable, a shadow of its former self. The most poignant possibility brings us to the very end. To the 15th century, to the final Ottoman siege of Constantinople. For weeks in 1453, the last emperor, Constantine XI, defended the legendary walls. The Ottoman fleet tried to break the seaward defenses. Is it conceivable that in those final, desperate hours, the Byzantines unleashed their oldest weapon one last time? Some romantic accounts suggest it. They speak of fire on the water in the last days. But the most reliable historians of the siege, like Critoboulos of Imbros, don't mention it. The great Ottoman cannons are the stars of that story. If Greek fire was used, it was ineffective, a sputter against an overwhelming tide. It did not change the outcome. That silence is perhaps the most telling evidence. By the empire's last breath, its divine flame had likely gone out. Not with a roar, but with the quiet failure of a mechanism no one alive could fully repair. Tracing these final mentions is like watching a star's light long after the star has died. You see a delayed glow, a last echo of power, but the source was already gone. The flame faded across a slow dimming of institutional memory, until all that remained was the legend, burning brighter in stories than it ever could again on the sea. The desire to see that fire again, that legendary fire, it never really goes away. So people try to build it. Historians and chemists, people like John Haldon, Alex Rowland, they take it seriously. They don't just throw things together. They start with the old texts, the lists from people like Anna Komnene. They gather what would have been there. Crude naphtha from seeps, pine resin, sulfur, saltpeter, quicklime, they follow it like a ghost recipe. The work is meticulous. They build small bronze siphons. They try pumps that could have existed, then they test it, they light it, and sometimes it's spectacular, flames that stick to water, jets of fire across a pool. Some mixes do ignite on contact with water, which fits the quicklime idea. Others make this thick, sticky blaze that's almost impossible to put out. From a distance, it looks right. It looks like a terrifying success, but every attempt falls short. The range isn't there, the sustained roar isn't there, the mixtures can be unstable. They separate in the tank, they clog the tube, the ignition can be unreliable, it sputters, or it burns too fast, a flash, then gone, not that slow, crawling inferno that could haunt a ship for hours. The modern chemist is missing something. Maybe it's one ingredient, a mineral from a lost mine, a specific pine resin from a forest that's gone, or maybe it's not an ingredient. Maybe it's a lost technique, a specific way to distill the naphtha, a method to prepare the quicklime, a precise sequence for mixing to make it stable. That gap between a good imitation and the real thing, it shows the limits. We have a list of parts, we don't have the manual. The written clues have been filtered through copyists, translators, people who may never have seen it. One ambiguous word can send you down a wrong turn for a century. The modern quest, with all its tools, hits that same Byzantine wall of secrecy. The formula was more than a list. It was a process, a craft, a muscle memory in the hands of a siphonarios who learned from his father. That lived knowledge evaporated. You can't dig it up. You can't scan it from parchment, but the attempts continue because the failure teaches you something. Each experiment that doesn't quite work shows you the sophistication of the original. It shows Greek fire wasn't a lucky accident. It was a repeatable, engineered product, an advanced chemical tradition. The modern recreations, in their very shortcomings, they pay a kind of tribute. They prove the legend wasn't a fairy tale. It was a real technological peak, one we can approach and circle and study, but never quite stand on again. The flame stays just out of reach, a reminder that some secrets once lost are woven too deeply into their time to ever be pulled completely free. Greek fire didn't end when the workshops went quiet. It just changed form. It moved from the sea to the page, from the bronze siphon to the screen, from history into story. Its real ingredients, the mystery, the terror, the liquid that laughed at water, they couldn't be contained. They seeped into our imagination, became a kind of shorthand for apocalyptic power. In fantasy, that influence is clear. George R. R. Martin's series, A Song of Ice and Fire, has a substance. Wildfire, it's a green, volatile liquid stored in clay jars beneath a city. It burns with a heat water can't put out. It's a secret held by an alchemist's guild. The parallels are direct. Martin takes that core, a secret, liquid flame that defies water, and puts it in a world of dragons. There, it becomes a last resort. A terrifying equalizer, a constant threat of catastrophe. It's Greek fire, but for a different kind of throne. Video games use it too. In historical or fantasy settings, you'll see incendiary weapons. A special ability, a plot device. You might command a ship that unleashes sea fire, or a siege engine that hurls pots of unquenchable flame. These versions focus on the visceral impact. The roar, the spread, the panic. They let you wield that terror for a moment. See the battlefield turn to a sheet of fire. It turns historical awe into something immediate. Sensory, historical novels and films show it as the ultimate Byzantine weapon. Its appearance is always a turning point. A fleet approaches Constantinople, confident. Then the Dromons emerge. The sky fills with that impossible, screaming fire. These depictions are about spectacle, but they also show the psychological weapon. They show the attackers' faces, frozen in disbelief, in dread. The true power wasn't just burning wood, it was shattering morale. What's interesting is what these adaptations keep and what they change. The mystery is always central. The formula is a secret held by a few. defying water is always a key trait. Those are the fingerprints of the original. What changes is the context. A fantasy writer might add a green hue, a magical component. A game designer might simplify its production to a single resource. The historical specifics melt away, leaving the archetype. This journey from state secret to story element, it tells us something. The most successful technology isn't always the one that lasts in physical form. Sometimes it's the one that embeds itself in the imagination. Greek fire achieved that, a kind of immortality. We may never know its exact formula, but we understand its essence. It represents the fear of the unknown, the horror of a weapon that breaks the rules, the dangerous allure of a power so great it must be secret. Every time a writer describes a burning green liquid or a game animates a fiery jet across digital waves, they're not just borrowing an idea. They're keeping a very old flame alive. The legend found its final fortress, not in an imperial archive, but in the endless fuel of human creativity. That flame changed naval combat completely. For centuries, fighting at sea meant getting close. Rams, hooks, boarding. Greek fire rewrote that. It turned distance into a weapon. Being able to project destruction from 50 feet away, to make the water itself a wall of fire, that forced every other navy to reconsider everything. The first change was in the ships themselves. The classic galley, built for speed and ramming, was a floating tinderbox. Its wooden hull, sealed with tar and pitch, was perfect fuel. After facing the Siphons, shipwrights started looking for answers. They tried to make vessels less flammable. There are accounts of countermeasures, covering hulls and sails with hides soaked in water or felt soaked in vinegar. This wasn't just a patch, it was an early, crude form of armor, a realization that a ship's skin needed protection from more than rams and arrows. It needed defense against a clinging chemical fire. That push for non-flammable materials on warships, that's a direct legacy of the fear, and the weapon changed tactics forever. The ideal fight was no longer a close melee. It became a stand-off. Byzantine dromon captains worked to keep that critical distance, just within Siphon range but outside the reach of enemy archers or boarders. That put a premium on speed and maneuver. To counter it, enemies had to develop new approaches, faster, lighter ships for hit and run, using long-range projectile weapons like heavy crossbows or early catapults to try and pick off the Siphon crews before they could get in range. The whole chessboard of naval warfare expanded. Commanders now had to think in 3 dimensions: wind, current, and the deadly arc of a flaming jet. This calculated dance of positioning and range, it prefigured the tactics of the Age of Sail and later naval artillery. The core idea: destroy the enemy before they can touch you. That was cemented by Greek fire. Maybe its deepest legacy is conceptual. The Byzantine dromon, with its mounted bronze siphon operated by a specialized crew, that was one of history's first dedicated weapon platforms. This wasn't a soldier throwing a pot from the deck. This was a complex, integrated system, a ship designed around a single, powerful weapon. The siphon was as central to the dromon's function as the ram had been to the trireme. In that, you see a clear precursor to the cannon-armed warship. The progression is logical, from a tube that projects liquid fire to a tube that projects a solid ball with explosive force. The Byzantine solution created a template. It proved you could mount a complex, crew-served weapon directly onto a vessel's structure, turning the ship itself into a mobile artillery piece. That influence rippled far beyond the Mediterranean. The memory of the sea fire carried by traders and tales likely shaped naval thinking in distant shipyards. The exact formula was lost, but the strategic problem it presented, how to attack and defend from a distance with overwhelming force, that remained. Solving that problem drove centuries of innovation. In ship design, in metallurgy for better weapons, in the tactical doctrines for using them, Greek fire wasn't a dead-end marvel. It was a catalyst, a shock to the system of naval warfare that forced adaptation and accelerated the evolution of technology. It showed what was possible when chemistry and engineering were fused into a single, terrifying purpose. And in doing that, it helped chart the course toward the future of conflict at sea, where the ship would become not just a transport, but a weapon in its own right. The burning sea left more than broken ships behind it. Centuries later, we can ask things they never thought to ask. When the pumps stopped and the last of the fuel burned out on the water, what was left in the water? The environmental impact of Greek fire, that's a modern question, a haunting one. We know what it was made of: crude petroleum, naphtha, probably mixed with pine resin and sulfur. A chemical slurry. Now imagine spraying hundreds, maybe thousands of gallons of that into a harbor, a confined bay. The immediate effect would have been a toxic layer. Unburned oil sinking, coating the shore, residue from the thickeners settling into the mud. For the marine life in that exact spot, the fish, the plants, it would have been a catastrophe. A single battle could poison a coastline for years. This wasn't a clean fire. It was a dirty, clinging, chemical burn, and it left a legacy in the sediment long after the fighting was done. From our view, it creates a paradox. A weapon made to protect a civilization inflicted a deep, silent wound on the natural world that sustained it. The defenders saw a miracle saving their city. The Bay experienced something else entirely. That leads to a harder question, more intimate. Beyond the awe, beyond the broken sieges, how did people back then grapple with the human cost? The enemy accounts are clear. It was horror. Men chose to drown rather than burn in that clinging fire. Did any Byzantine writer, any chronicler loyal to the emperor, ever pause to express unease? The record we have shows a striking silence. For them, it was the perfuriton, the guarded fire, a divine gift. Its use was necessary, an act of preservation. In a world of constant threats, the choice was stark. Use this terrible tool or cease to exist. The horror inflicted on the enemy wasn't celebrated in detail, but it was accepted. The cost of survival. The focus was always on the miracle, the salvation, the marvel. The suffering it caused was the suffering of the other, a justified consequence of attacking God's chosen empire. This isn't just a medieval failing, it's almost universal in war. The humanity of the adversary dissolves when you face an existential threat, and Greek fire, by its nature, made that dissolution nearly absolute. It created a distance, a physical distance with that jet of flame, but a psychological one too. The operator didn't look his enemy in the eye, he aimed at a ship. A ship that became, in an instant, an abstract pyre. That distance, it might have made the moral weight easier to carry. To think this way isn't to judge the past by our standards. It shows how our lenses for technology have multiplied. For the Byzantine emperor, the only questions that mattered were, does it work and is it secret? Today, we add other measures. We ask about collateral damage, environmental persistence, the specific nature of the suffering caused. A wonder weapon isn't so wonderful if its wonder is built on a hidden, toxic legacy. Applying these modern views to Greek fire changes its story. It becomes less a tactical mystery and more a parable about power and its costs. It asks us to look at the tools we marvel at today. What unseen consequences might future generations trace back to our own defining technologies? That flame that defended an empire, it forces us to consider an old equation. What are we willing to burn, and what poisons do we accept in the soil and the seed for the sake of our own preservation? The silence of that medieval harbor, after the last ember sank, holds a question that echoes far beyond its time. That guarded fire didn't come out of nowhere. People had been dreaming of flame for a long time, wherever there were walls to breach or ships to burn. The Assyrians, they tipped arrows with burning pitch. Roman legions, they used heated sand, boiling oil in a siege. And in China, by the Tang dynasty, alchemists, they were working on immortality mixtures. They stumbled on a formula. Fei Huo, flying fire, a primitive gunpowder you could shoot from bamboo tubes. All of these were terrifying in their moment, but none of them had that specific nightmare combination. The one that defined the Byzantine weapon. So you look at these parallels, it shows Greek fire not as some singular miracle, but as a peak, the pinnacle of a long, grim tradition. Pyrotechnic warfare, the difference was in the details, and those details made all the difference. Take incendiary arrows used for centuries, simple, direct. A cloth wrap soaked in pitch or oil. You light it, you shoot it. Effective for setting thatched roofs on fire, wooden palisades, but it was a one-shot weapon. Once that initial fuel burned, the fire could often be beaten out. It lacked persistence or flaming pots. Clay grenades filled with burning oil or quicklime, used in many sieges, created a frightening spectacle, but the effect was localized. A splash of fire on a stone wall, a wooden deck, dangerous but containable. Sailors could push a burning pot overboard. Soldiers could avoid the patch of flame. These weapons added fire to the battlefield, but they didn't change the fundamental rules of the battlefield itself. Then there were mixtures that came closer. Arab and Persian armies used naft, crude petroleum. They would heat it in cauldrons, pour it from castle walls, or hurl pots that shattered on impact. A sticky, horrific substance, but again, it typically needed an external flame to ignite it, and while it was hard to extinguish, it didn't have that reported self-igniting quality. It wasn't engineered for precise, projected delivery from a moving ship. It was a defensive area weapon, not a controlled, offensive system. This comparative view, it brings the Byzantine achievement into focus. What set their formula apart was the integration, multiple revolutionary properties in a single, deployable system. First, the fuel itself, engineered for adhesion and for aquatic persistence. Second, the ignition mechanism, whether by brazier or quicklime reaction, made it reliably instant, terrifyingly interactive with water. Third, and maybe most critical, it was married to a delivery system. The pressurized bronze siphon on the dromen that turned a chemical mixture into a tactical instrument. You couldn't just throw it, you aimed it, you sustained its stream. You controlled the range. The Chinese flying fire of the same era, that's a parallel path. While the Byzantines perfected a liquid projection system, Chinese innovators were pioneering a solid propellant one. Their early gunpowder mixtures produced jets of flame and smoke, could propel primitive rockets, fire arrows, a different kind of leap, one that would eventually lead to true explosives, firearms. But in the medieval period, these were often less reliable, more unpredictable, harder to aim with precision from a rolling ship than the Byzantine liquid stream. So when you place Greek fire on this global timeline, its uniqueness becomes clear. It wasn't the first weapon to use fire. It wasn't the only one to use petroleum. But it was arguably the first to combine advanced chemistry, mechanical engineering, and naval doctrine into a single system, repeatable, psychologically overwhelming. It took the ancient dream of controlling fire and made it a precise, deployable reality. On the one element where fire should not exist, other cultures had powerful incendiaries. The Byzantines had a system, and in that system you see not just a weapon but a moment of technological imagination, one focused not on explosion but on controlled, enduring, inescapable combustion. This context doesn't diminish the legend, it grounds it. The true marvel wasn't a magical substance, it was a synthesis, known ideas brought together into something the world had never seen before, and would struggle to see again. The story of Greek fire, it stays with you. It's this perfect echo, a whisper of what we can do, and then a reminder of how easily that kind of brilliance just gets swallowed by time. It's not a footnote, it's a mirror. It reflects these timeless fascinations all bundled into one story. First, there's the lost secret, a complete piece of advanced knowledge guarded with absolute dedication that just vanished. We live in a world now saturated with information where almost nothing feels truly hidden. So the idea of a secret that powerful, a secret that could defend a civilization, and so fragile it could be erased, it feels almost mythical. It's the ultimate locked room mystery. The room is history, and the key was melted down centuries ago. We're drawn to that void, to the edges of that empty space. Our minds itch to fill it. Every theory, every modern experiment is an attempt to solve a puzzle where the answer sheet was burned. Then there's the game-changing technology. This wasn't a gradual improvement, it was a leap, a sudden rewriting of the rules. It left people in awe and terror. We're captivated by that, by moments of profound technological disruption, when a single innovation tilts the axis of history. Greek fire was that moment for the medieval world. It speaks to our own age of rapid, disruptive change. The story feels familiar. We recognize the shock of the sailors facing it because we live with similar leaps. Wrapped around all of that is the romance of a fallen empire, Byzantium, with its gold and marble, its intricate ceremonies and long twilight, a civilization that feels both grand and tragically distant. Greek fire is its most dazzling artifact, a symbol of its sophistication at its height and of the irreversible loss when that world finally collapsed. The weapon's fate is tied to the empire's fate. Its disappearance makes the fall of Constantinople feel more absolute, more poignant. You're left with the ghost of a power that once made the sea itself obey an emperor's command. And finally, the image itself is viscerally powerful, an unstoppable force, a fire that water cannot quench, that taps into something primal. It's the stuff of ancient myths and modern stories. A power that defies the fundamental order, that contradiction, wet fire. It's so stark, so visually and conceptually arresting, it etches itself into the imagination. It's more than a weapon, it's a paradox made manifest. That's why the mystery endures. Greek fire sits at that fertile crossroads where verified history meets enduring legend. The historical facts are firm. We know it existed, we know it worked, we have the accounts of its terror, but the precise mechanics are just out of reach, shrouded in intentional silence. That gap is where legend grows. It allows the story to breathe, to expand beyond the pages of a chronicle and into the realm of archetype. It becomes a vessel for our wonder about lost knowledge and supreme power. It asks questions we're still asking. How far will we go to protect an advantage? What's the cost of a secret that cannot be shared? Can a technology be so potent that its very existence becomes a danger? The burning sea of the Bosporus isn't just a memory of a battle. It's a reflective pool. We look into its fading ripples and see our own ambitions, our own fears about creation and control flickering back. The puzzle may be missing pieces forever, but perhaps that incompleteness is its greatest gift. It lets the flame keep burning, not on water, but in the endless fuel of our curiosity. The flame finally went out, not with a roar, but quietly, like something forgotten in an archive. Greek fire was this incredible human achievement, wrapped in total secrecy. And then it was just lost. It was like a technological phoenix. It rose from the ashes of a city under siege. It defended an empire for centuries, and then, when that empire fell apart, it vanished. Back into the mists of time, we followed it from the mind of a refugee inventor to the bronze siphons on the Imperial Navy's ships. We saw its mechanics. A liquid that clung, that burned even on water. It sent a psychological chill through enemy fleets. It was a weapon of fear as much as fire. We've sifted through the theories. Quicklime pine resin, trying to solve a puzzle where the final pieces are gone. It stands as a testament to Byzantine ingenuity, sure, to their chemistry, their engineering, their deception. but also to the fragile nature of knowledge itself, a truth that powerful, something that could hold back history. It was entrusted to a system, to human memory, to an imperial order, and when that order fell, the truth fell with it. The complete formula is lost, probably for good, but its legacy burns on as a symbol of desperate power. As one of history's great mysteries, it lives in our stories, in our games, in our experiments. It leaves a quiet question hanging in the air. What other pinnacles of human understanding have we just let slip away?